Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series. Can we save the Oakland A's? And we are at the start of spring training for the 2037 season. And this year, our objective in saving the A's is to win a back-to-back World Series championship. So lofty ambitions for us, although ownership only wants us to reach the playoffs, upgrade at catcher, and increase fan interest. But given that by next season we're also supposed to build a dynasty, a back-to-back championship would certainly be a strong step in the direction of that goal as well. We touched at the end of the last episode on what had transpired over the last 4+ months or 4 months or so in our development lab. And so we've kind of re-racked the 20 slots in our development lab, focused over the next 4 or 5 weeks on a lot of defensive programs, a few running programs, and even an occasional bunting program. You'll end up seeing that we got a fair amount of pitchers working on their defense, the way that everything broke this year, but a pretty eclectic mix of things. One thing that is a little disappointing, we've talked a lot over the last several episodes about potentially moving first baseman Andy Brailovsky to left field this year against right-handed pitching so that we can get Brailovsky, the designated hitter, Juan Ramos, and our longtime third baseman Colt Keith, who's now really probably more of a first baseman, into the lineup at the same time. And although we have Brailovsky playing left field in spring training this year, and we've changed his position to left field, you can see that the improvement program for him is unfortunately only to improve his defense at first base. I don't think there's a lot of ways to really change this. I think it's just kind of the luck of the draw. But if any of you have come up with a way to actually be able to kind of customize the position that someone is specifically working on, I would love to hear it, because I have not figured that one out quite yet. But we'll be checking in at the end of spring training once we've likely made the decisions on our 26-man roster on how these programs went. Hopefully we'll have some good defensive improvements occurring over the next month plus. And before we get the episode moving forward, want to respond to a couple of comments from the previous episode. The acquisition of Camden Reisinger proved to be pretty controversial with our fans from Great Britain. Both Sean Grattan and Stanley Rosella are quite concerned that Reisinger's combustible personality and disruptive tendencies in the clubhouse, along with his fragility, make it not the wisest move of us to sign him to a 1-year deal. As we talked about when we signed him, the guy does have a 1.56 ERA plus and a 72 FIP minus over the course of his career. Only signed for this next year at $1.4 million. So I do think if he proves to be disruptive, that we will move him on to different pastures as soon as we possibly can. But in the meantime, we're hoping he'll ultimately be successful on the field and not too disruptive in the clubhouse. And apparently the worldwide scouting department based in Great Britain has a more of a standard on morals and character than perhaps I do here with the Oakland A's. And the second comment that I'd like to address is one that I think those of you who have been following us over the course of this series, and those of you who have been following us for multiple series over the last few years, will probably enjoy when we look back and try to evaluate how we've actually done with some of our decisions. And Kevin McDowell asked if we could go back and look at how we've actually done with the most prominent international amateur free agents that we've gone after over the course of this playthrough. And it's a great question. I don't know the answer. Anecdotally, I think we've done pretty well with international amateur free agents and the strategies that we have put out there over the years, and more importantly, the players that we've brought into our organization and how they've developed. I think we've probably done better with international amateur free agents than we have with the top couple rounds of the draft, quite honestly. But it'll be an interesting thought exercise to see if my perceptions match up with reality. Probably just going to go through from 2025, which was the first IAFA period after the game started in the spring of 2024, obviously. And just go through the first 5 or 6 periods because the guys who we've signed over the last 6 or 7 years, most of them are still pretty young. Some of them over the most recent years aren't even on a DSL roster yet. So I think we'll get a better sense from those first 5 or 6 classes of whether we've had any success or not. The first class, we went with a diversified approach, 3 primary guys that we brought on board. Juan Rodas was a important prospect in our system for several years. I believe we ended up trading him away. 2032, he was traded with catcher Drake Baldwin and third baseman Ambioris Tavares in exchange for that rental of Kyle Manzardo. Rodas, over the course of his major league career at this point, has had parts of the last 4 seasons in the majors. Best season was 2035 with the Cubs, 16 homers, 59 ribbies, and a 105 WRC plus. Overall, over the course of about 400 major league games, though, he's been a well below average offensive player and below replacement level overall. Jai Watterson is, I'm going to have to scroll all the way back down here and find these Januaries from many years ago. There might be a more efficient way to do this if any of you know it. Always helpful to get that type of feedback as well. Jai Watterson is a pitcher that we brought on board in that IAFA period as well, out of Australia, mate. He is a guy that we also traded away along with Duncan Marston, who was our first-round draft pick, Mickey Moniak, and Josh Beatty in exchange for reliever Josh Teeples. And Teeples really did not do much of anything at all with us. So that was not a great trade. Watterson, over the course of his major league career, a 34-21 record, 6 saves, 18 holds, mid-4 ERA, and pretty average in terms of his ERA plus and FIP minus over the course of his career for the 29-year-old Aussie. And we'll check in on the last guy that we picked up in that 2025 IAFA period as well. And that was Luis Parra, $1.1 million signing bonus to him. Taking a look at when we moved on from Mr. Parra. I'm assuming it was also a trade. No, we actually just let Parra leave our organization in 2032, it looks like. Yeah, he did have some pretty significant injuries. He, at this point, has also pitched in the majors, 4.24 ERA over 80 2/3 innings. Hasn't pitched in the majors since 2034. He is in the Astros organization at this point, basically been a replacement level player in the limited opportunities that Parra has received. So 3 major leaguers out of that first IAFA period, but none of them had any impact on us other than being trade bait. Second season, not all that great either. Bertrand Albrighton was a big-time prospect in our organization. Ended up investing a lot in him in the development lab over the years, as you can see. Not generally a ton of success there. We ultimately traded him away for shortstop Julio Del Campo, who was briefly a utility infielder for us. Was a situation where I believe Albrighton was out of options at that point, and he wasn't going to make our 26-man roster, so we took what we could get for him. He's spent part of 3 years in the majors at this point. 237 average, 17 homers, and 82 ribbies over 654 at-bats. Below average offensive player and below replacement level overall. And although Albrighton was the most expensive guy we signed that year, we also spent close to $2 million on left fielder Jorge Montez. He is still actually in our organization, just kind of hanging out in high A ball as organizational depth with a high work ethic, but he has never made it above that level, and at almost 28 years old, doubtful that he ever will. And I thought perhaps you were all going to think I was delusional or just a liar with my assessment of how we had done in the IAFA class, but moving to 2027, a definite big win here. We spent every penny that we had, $5.7 million, on the second baseman Alejandro Landin in 2027. And he was a member of our World Series championship team this past year, also an all-star for the first time. He has played 2+ years in the majors, averaging over his 2 full years in the majors, 36 home runs and over 100 ribbies a season, 119 career WRC plus, and he's averaged close to a 5 WAR each of his 2 full seasons in the majors. So Flea Landin, the switch-hitting middle infielder, solid defensively, solid with the bat. Don't love that he's fragile physically. He actually did just go through a successful strength and conditioning program that moved him from fragile to slightly fragile, was, I believe, the way it was worded in the email we got. So that's a little bit of progress there. We also ambitiously, before he had really done anything at all in the majors, signed him to an extension that given how he's developed, is a very valuable asset for us to have on the books. So Landin, definitely a big success as our IAFA focus in 2027. Had a different strategy in 2028, picked up Alexis Saunas, Julio Morales, and Juan Rojas. Only Morales is still in our organization. With relatively modest amounts. Our big signing that year was the right fielder Arturo Estrada. We thought he potentially was going to be a great contact hitter, and can argue that he's achieved that, hitting .301 in 658 at-bats for the Twins this past year. Only a 92 WRC plus, but given his speed, 36 stolen bases in 38 attempts, and pretty solid range in the outfield, still put up a 3 WAR for the Twins organization for John Thomas. And I know that our friends in Great Britain explained to me exactly what John Thomas meant. So thank you for educating me, in addition to sharing your views on Camden Reisinger. Estrada was traded away by us, obviously, when we did a rental for Juan Soto in 2032, when we were chasing a playoff appearance, which I believe we ended up making. We did make the playoffs, but we were also chasing a championship that year. So given that Estrada looks like he could be a pretty good contact hitter, steal some bases, A player that we spent some money on to bring in is an IAFA guy who has developed pretty well. Unfortunately, his best days as a major leaguer, and likely all of his days as a major leaguer, will not be as a part of the Oakland Athletics organization. Moving to 2029, and this was a pretty important IAFA period for us. Hermosa Armenta, no longer with us in our organization. Byron Brain, not with us either. But Byron Brain ended up being a very important player for us. He had, and still has, very good home run power and an excellent eye, but questionable contact and insane number of strikeouts, which we saw last year with the Marlins when he struck out over 200 times in less than 400 at-bats, hit just a .191 and was basically a replacement level player. Ultimately didn't have the profile that we wanted to have on our major league squad, but he had a lot of value in the trade market, and we used him along with a few other guys as the cornerstone of the trade that got us the starting pitcher Kevin Patterson, as well as the first baseman Andy Brilovsky that we just talked about, who we are trying to switch to a left fielder. So Byron Brain, for a player who we did not spend a ton of money to bring on board, certainly paid some big dividends for a guy who got a $350,000 signing bonus in terms of really helping us put together the team that just won a world championship. A couple other cheap guys that year, Edgar Aquino and Alejandro Nava. Neither of them looks like they're big-time prospects. The big one that year was Sergio Palomares. He made his major league debut with us this past season and is certainly in the competition to be a fourth or fifth outfielder for us this year. Probably will ultimately make the team because of that 65 range. He's the second best defensive center fielder we have in the higher levels of our organization, so he'll likely be the backup for Jake Ortega there. Also has good speed and a pretty good contact hitter. Should get a decent amount of extra base hits, but not going to hit very many home runs. But Gravedigger Palomares, another guy who is a major leaguer at this point, and we're hoping will, at the very least, be a fourth or fifth outfielder and maybe end up being more than that for us down the line. And the last year we'll take a look at now is 2030, where we went pretty aggressive on two big-ticket items. First baseman Juan Alarcón did make it to high A-ball last year, but wasn't even an everyday player for us. Love his personality, but looking at his batting profile at the age of 23, don't really view him as being a big-time prospect. Fortunately, the other guy that we signed that year is a guy that we think is going to have some more success, and another guy that we have locked up for a long-term deal, and that's the young outfielder Arturo Uresti. We signed him before last season to a 10-year, $79 million deal, hoping that he will outplay that. Signed him before he ever played in the majors. Did have 278 at-bats as a rookie last season, 20 homers, 61 ribbies, 270 average, 138 WRC plus, put up a 1.6 WAR for us. Like the personality, competent defensively, okay on the base paths, durable, and we think he's a guy who should hit a lot of home runs and draw a lot of walks for us as a very important corner outfielder for us for hopefully the next decade. So thanks again to Kevin McDowell for the idea to look back there. It seems like, given the relatively modest number of IAFA players that we signed and the fact that these guys are typically 16, 17 years old, the success rate of turning them into major leaguers, I would say, is certainly better than I think what we've seen with, maybe the guys that we picked in the first handful of rounds in the draft over the years who are somewhat equivalent, albeit a little bit older and a little bit more developed generally. But with guys like Uresti and Palomares and Landin in our organization, and the fact that over the years we've also extracted some value from the likes of Estrada and Bertrand Albrighton, some of the other guys that we've traded away. My evaluation would be we've done reasonably well with the IAFA players, but obviously interested in hearing different perspectives, and if some of you have an even higher success rate with your IAFA classes, would love to hear some suggestions on how we can maybe take our game to the next level. And with that, it's time to get rolling with spring training. Next 4 or 5 weeks will be important. Hopefully Kevin Patterson, who we mentioned we picked up in the trade of Byron Brain, will be back and looking similar to the way he has in the past after he finally recovers from that surgery to remove bone chips that he suffered in the final game of the World Series last year when he was our starting pitcher, although he was not ultimately involved in the decision for us since he was removed from the game early when he suffered that injury. And the first 2 weeks of spring training have gone fine. 5-4-1 record for Oakland. Unfortunately, did just suffer the first significant injury of spring training. Our backup catcher, Jaden Boakai, going to be out with a strained lat for about 4 weeks. So that's definitely going to be an opportunity for one of the young catchers who have been in our organization, kind of stuck in AA, AAA for the last few years, to potentially be the backup at the start of the season to Dave Ackley. With the season starting on April 2nd, it's conceivable that we're only going to need a backup for a few games if all goes well with Boakai's recovery. He is a guy who had been our starter when he first came up over his first season and a half, close to 2 years in the majors. Been a backup for us the last couple of years, despite his great glove when we went with Ackley, who we felt had a potentially better bat. Boakai just a 76 WRC plus for the course of his career, but he still has been an above replacement level player every season that he's been in the majors, driven by that outstanding defense, including his world-class blocking as a catcher, and not far off from world-class framing ability. And as we get to around the 2/3 way point of spring training, we've been playing even better, 11-6-1 record for our A's. Our old buddy Bobby Cabral having a monster spring for the Mariners. OPS of over 1,100 and 6 home runs. We'll see if he can bring that into the regular season. Unfortunately, another injury. This one a little more significant. The left-handed reliever Chris Carl going to be out for about 6 to 7 weeks with a herniated disc. So hopefully we'll see him back sometime in early to mid-May in the majors. Carl, a lefty who's probably got to prove something to us this year. We like him on paper, and we're paying $3.5 million for him this year. We did decide to bring him back rather than trade him away as we did with some of our other relievers who were getting a little more expensive. The fact that he was a lefty worked in his favor, but after 2 really good years at 23 and 24 to start off his career, his ERA ballooned to 4.44 in 2035 and was 5.26 this past year. He's been below replacement level each of the last couple of seasons. He is a guy who, when we look at his ratings, is pretty even in terms of his splits between lefties and righties, so he's not a pure lefty specialist. Do like the plus stuff, the plus control, outstanding cutter, and a decent change. Does tend to give up some home runs, though, and hasn't been all that great for us, and he's going to begin this upcoming year on the IL. So with a backup catcher and a pitcher who was almost certainly going to make our roster on the IL to begin the season. We will have some more interesting decisions than we might have anticipated when we get down to focusing on our 26-man roster, and that's really only about a week and a half away till we start making those final cuts. And I hope nothing's wrong with the way this is recording. Just had a blip on my computer, so if you can't see anything and I'm finishing the episode right now, I apologize for that. If I continue speaking going forward and we continue moving forward this episode, you'll know that the problem was not as significant as I feared it might be. And we've made it to the end of spring training. Fortunately, no more significant injuries, at least that we've heard about yet. 14-11-3 record for us, half a game behind who else? The Rangers, as far as the Cactus League standings for whatever those are worth. Got a few days left now until the season begins, so it's time for us to start giving some very serious consideration to who's going to end up making the team before we head north. And we've been spending some time kind of getting the 26-man roster figured out. It was not all that hard, especially with the injury to Mr. Carl, for us to figure out the 13 pitchers that we wanted to bring north. Facing some tougher decisions as far as our everyday players, and we're down to the final two cuts, and I'll talk through them with you. We knew that we were going to have quite a battle for the final outfield spot or two on our team, and that's where the final cuts will come from. Federico Aldana, you may remember him, the minor league free agent signing that we completed just after Christmas. The 27-year-old is a veteran from Cuba, and his profile suggests that he's probably ready for the major leagues right now, but given that we did sign him to a minor league deal and he's never played in the major leagues before, he's got 3 option years left, and we also would likely only be playing him against left-handed pitching given his profile. So we're going to let him play every day down in the minors now and take advantage of the fact that he does have those option years. So I'm sure he won't be happy to be going to AAA Las Vegas, but that is where Aldana will end up. And the other cut is not actually going to be a cut. You may remember Juan Lovato, who we picked up in a big trade with Atlanta back in last July. That was the deal that got Sergio Campos off of our books. And Lovato was a pretty highly regarded prospect for some reason, although when we looked at his age and his profile, it didn't necessarily make tons of sense to us. He hit pretty well for us in AAA last year, .312 average, 16 homers, 40 ribbies, but he struggled mightily in 118 at-bats at the major league level with Oakland, and he was 0 for 1 with Atlanta, and he was 0 for 1 in a very small sample size with us in the majors with Oakland. The issue with Lovato, who's going to be turning 25 years old in just a few days, is that he is out of option years. Second issue with Lovato is that, unfortunately, when we shopped him for major league players, there were only a handful of guys that we could get in return, and they were kind of crappy guys making a lot of money. But interestingly, when we shopped him in packages for minor leaguers, there were some relatively interesting options out there for Mr. Lovato. Now, we had to include very big-time players in several of these potential packages, but one of them is actually pretty intriguing to me because we're going to get a prospect who I think is at least as good as Lovato and arguably a bit better than Lovato. And he's also a guy who's got option years left, so that will give us some optionality with him. And the trade is going to be to, if I can find it here, if it hasn't disappeared on me because of the vagaries of how these screens work sometimes. I know there was a guy here. Yes, there we go. Danny Phelps of the Boston Red Sox organization. They want Lovato and Kevin Patterson, who's an important starting pitcher for us, who, after that injury he suffered in the final game of the World Series last year, kind of looks the same as it ever was as far as him. So pleased to have him back, and we've got him on a decent contract, so we're not going to be shipping Patterson out. But when we discuss this trade for Danny Phelps, there is another guy that we're willing to get rid of that makes it work, and that's the catching prospect, Ben Busby. And Busby is a pretty solid catching prospect. He's a guy we got in the 12th round of the 2034 draft. He's never actually made it out of rookie ball for us, just because we haven't viewed him as a big-time prospect. But taking a look at his scouting report, he, over the last season and a half, has gone from a very marginal looking prospect to someone who's developed reasonably well. Now he's 24 years old, slightly above average defensively, probably slightly below average offensively for a major leaguer, but certainly not a bad bat for a backup catcher. But at 24 years old, and given that I've never moved him out of rookie ball, I can't claim that we've had big plans for him. And if we pair Mr. Busby with Juan Lovato, who, as I talked about, is a, on paper, pretty decent looking prospect, we can get a pretty decent looking prospect from the Red Sox, Danny Phelps, a guy that they picked 5th overall less than 3 years ago. They've been handling him as strangely as I've been handling Busby. He's 24 years old, and he spent the last 2 seasons in rookie ball where he was even more dominant than Busby was. And then late last year, they promoted him all the way from rookie ball to the majors, where, not shockingly, he hit just a $181 with a 31 WRC plus and was well below replacement level. But he's durable. He's got some positive personality traits. He looks like a competent corner outfielder. Only have average scouting accuracy on him, unfortunately, but do think that he could be an interesting left-handed bat down the line. And as I mentioned, he's a guy who also still has 3 option years left. So given that we were going to have to risk losing Lovato for nothing, because he was going to be our final cut, and Busby, I can't claim as someone as a 12th round pick that I had big aspirations for, other than being a pretty solid veteran presence for the lower minor league teams. To be able to get a guy who was a first round pick just a few years ago, we think could still have above average home run power. He's durable. Now, granted, he's 24 years old, and he's below average in terms of his contact, home run power, and eye. So some of the concerns that I have about Lovato as a 24-year-old, that he's never really going to beat this potential that I think he might have, can certainly be said about Phelps. But given that Phelps is a little bit younger and does still have those options available, we are going to go ahead and, well, we're going to see if they'll throw in a little more cash with us first, because we're always scrambling for every penny of cash that we can get. But if they're willing to throw in, they've got a ton of budget space available because they're rebuilding, so I'm assuming they will throw in some cash for us. And we actually can only get $150,000-ish in cash back in return in addition to Phelps, but we will take every penny we can get, and we're going to trade Lovato and Busby for Danny Phelps, and that will allow us to get to the 26-man roster we are looking for. And while I'll still be spending some time offline before we actually begin the new season, figuring out our specific batting orders, I haven't spent a lot of time with that. The trade and the demotion that we just talked about did get us to 13 position players because reliever R.J. Cope does remain an occasional two-way guy for us. Ackley will be back as our starting catcher, hoping that he can be a little more strong offensively this year than he's been the last couple years. Juan Anguiano is going to be our backup catcher. Mentioned that we would need one with the injury to Jaden Boakai. Anguiano is a guy who's been in our system for a long time. You may remember we picked him up years and years ago, right before the trade deadline in 2027, when we were a struggling team that had never had a winning record. Picked him up when we bailed on Gabe Spire as he was getting more expensive, traded away Anthony Santander and Arubiel Fuentes to the Giants for the prospect Anguiano. He's developed into a pretty respectable defensive catcher. Question the bat a bit. He was up with us very briefly in 2035. Last year he was our backup in AAA, hit 281. Doesn't really have a lot left to prove offensively in AAA. He's soon to be 27 years old. One option year left for him, which presumably we'll end up using when we do send him back down when Boakai is ready to join the team. But for the time being, Anguiano is going to be our backup catcher. Colt Keith is going to play first for us against right-handed pitching. Juan Ramos will be back as our DH year after leading the AL with 148 ribbies. Steve Allison returns as a utility infielder. Alejandro Landin will play second. Andy Toribio will play short. And Rodney Mesidor will be our third baseman. Andy Brailovsky is going to play left field against right-handed pitching, and then move back to his more natural first base position against lefties. Luis Tavera back in as our left fielder against left-handed pitching. Jake Ortega, the franchise, of course, will be playing center field, likely batting third. Sergio Palomares, the former IAFA signing we talked about at the top of the episode, will be back as a utility outfielder. And Arturo Uresti, another IAFA signing, is going to get his first full season in the majors as our everyday right fielder here in 2037. So no real shocks. I don't think. We knew we were going to have some tough decisions to make in the outfield, which we've now done with the trade of Lovato and the demotion of the international free agent we signed a few months ago. Other than that, I think the only surprise is that we've got a different backup catcher because of the injury to Boakai, but infield-wise, no surprises at all from my perspective with the 6 infielders that we ended up having on the roster. Pitching-wise, we've made the decision on the 13 players that are going to be coming north with us. I don't think there's going to be any shocks for most of the players, except for perhaps the one who's going to be taking the spot of the lefty Carl. But probably will be some interesting discussion on who ended up making our rotation. Jackson Ferris and Chase Dora are back as our 1-2 combination. Jesus Saldana, the IAFA player that we signed to that big extension this past offseason before he had ever pitched in the majors, was respectable during the spring. And we are going to give Saldana, with his pretty strong profile, an opportunity to be our number 3 starter. Kevin Patterson back at number 4. And Jason DeCaro is going to slip to the number 5 spot in our rotation. He does have that leader personality type that we want to take advantage of by keeping him in the rotation. So DeCaro, the number 5 starter for us this year, despite a rough spring. What that means is that Doug Weiss, the player we drafted out of Austin Peay a few years ago, is going to remain in the bullpen for us. He was respectable last year in the bullpen, served as a stopper for us from time to time. He's actually going to be a setup man this year, occasional stopper for us. The reason that Weiss isn't in the rotation is that he's still looking for a ton of money for an extension, even though he's relatively unproven. He wants 120 some odd million over 10 years, so he still views himself as a starter right now. But because we've actually got Saldana signed to a long-term deal, we're going to give him the opportunity to start at first. And as I said, particularly with the disruptive Camden Reisinger on the roster right now, I want to make sure that we get the benefit from that captain personality that DeCaro has, so we're keeping him in the rotation as well. If Weiss is lights out or we have some injury issues, certainly could see him getting a spot in the rotation, but he is a great fallback option. Kamani O'Banner, last year's closer, at least for the second half of the year, is going to be our stopper for the time being. O'Banner, certainly another guy who could be in the rotation. Camden Reisinger, going to be the closer, at least to start things out. Jeremy Scholl and R.J. Cope back in setup roles. Mike Curtis back as a middle reliever, and the lefty Bobby Garland, another guy who certainly could start for us. He ended up being our fifth starter most of last year with 26 starts. Going to be a long reliever and emergency starting pitcher for us. So we've got a ton of guys who could start. The one surprise as far as who made the team, and it probably had to do with the fact that it gives us a third lefty in the bullpen as much as anything else, is Chuck Huntley. He's never pitched above Double-A. He was a minor league all-star a couple of seasons ago in 2035. Did put up a 1.93 ERA in 28 innings in Double-A a year ago. Looking at his profile, it looks like the 22-year-old is probably ready for the major leagues. Throws in the mid to high 90s. So far, the sixth-round pick out of Coleman has developed very well for us. Will give us a third lefty in the pen. Depending on how he does, could make it an interesting decision once Carl is healthy, but that's still probably a good month away. For the time being, along with Cope and Garland, Huntley gives us a third lefty in the rotation. Only one lefty in the rotation this year, with the guy who's been heading up our rotation for the better part of the last decade in Jackson Ferris. You can see outside of DeCaro, and I guess Saldana to some extent, our starting pitching was excellent in the spring, and our relief pitching, with the exception of Huntley, who was still respectable, was absolutely lights out. So feeling pretty confident that this pitching staff is going to perform well for us here in this upcoming 2037 season. And as we close in on opening day, it might be good that we demoted Aldana. You can see the latest scouting report on him is not good at all. A lot of areas where we think he retracted a bit. We'll see what he can do for us in AAA. Certainly could be back up if we have some injury issues, but certainly don't love seeing a scouting report like that right when the season is about to get underway. We're also just a day away from some development lab results. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of people excelling with the defense programs, but we've got some people struggling too, unfortunately. Could have some bad results. Huntley, who just made the major league team, try and improve his defense at pitcher, is struggling. And then also Rodney Mesidor and Steve Allison, third baseman and utility infielder, struggling with improving defense and base running fundamentals. We did have, I believe, one of the guys that we traded away in the final spot. I'm guessing it probably was Lovato, so kind of wasted a spot in the dev lab there. A lot of guys who are excelling as well with these simpler programs, so that's positive, but always hate to put people through a program and end up having something negative occur, and it looks like there's a chance that we'll have a 2 or 3 programs where that might happen for us this year, unfortunately. And we've made it now to opening day, so before we finish up the episode, we'll take a look at the preseason predictions and also take a look at how things ended up in the development lab. Our A's projected to go 98-64 in the simulation that was just run, so put ourselves in a good position potentially with the second best record in the American League to hopefully defend our World Series championship and obviously at the very least get this team back to the playoffs. Jake Ortega expected to hit 300 this year. 45 steals would, I believe, be a career high for him. Pitching-wise, Saldana, the youngster, was 17-3 with a 2.86 ERA. Chase Dora, 16-7 with an ERA right around 3. So it looks like our pitching could be really good. Steve Genus of the Rangers projected to go 20-6 with a 2.30 ERA and 270 strikeouts as he tries to win a fourth consecutive Cy Young Award for the despised rival Rangers. Over in the National League, the Braves expected to have the best record in baseball at 103-59. Michael Harris II, at the age of 36, expected to have a monster year. And then the Babe Ruth of OOTP 25, Mike Ramsey, expected to have a 326 average, 41 homers, and 127 ribbies, while also going 20-6 with over 300 strikeouts and an ERA barely above 2 for the incredible pitcher from the Atlanta Braves organization. I mean, you look at these ratings, and he is going to be a monster for many years to come. And honestly, also looking like he's going to be a monster at the plate and in the field for many years to come. It's not inconceivable that by the time we get to about 2050 in this playthrough, that Sirique could arguably be the greatest all-around player in baseball history when all is said and done. But the only time we're really going to need to worry too much about Mr. Ramsey is if we end up back in the World Series and Atlanta makes it there as well. So wish him the best of luck this year. We will check in on the development lab. Juan Ramos, no improvement at first base. Doug Weiss with outstanding results, improving his defense as a pitcher. Jake Ortega, outstanding results working on his bunting. Not much to improve with a player like him. I don't think we're going to often use him as a bunter, but good to see some improvement from the franchise. Unfortunately, we did have two of the poor results that we were talking about. Steve Allison with base running fundamentals, his injury proneness as far as his legs moved to normal from normal bordering on durable, so injuries a little bit more likely for our utility infielder to his legs after that failed training session. Rodney Mesidor had a poor result. Fortunately, it doesn't look like there were any noticeable changes to his defense. Nehemiah Mulligan, a AAA infielder, improved his defense. Jeff Tisch, AAA pitcher, improved his defense. Daniel Blanco, another minor league pitcher, improved his defense as well. Joe Harmon, one of the younger prospects in the organization, 22-year-old who's going to be starting the year in Double-A. A lot of improvement in the bunting program that he went through. Alejandro Landin, better base running fundamentals. Andy Brailovsky improved some of his infielder ratings. Looks like that switched to a second base program somehow. I'm pretty confident when we looked at and talked about this at the start of the episode, it was listed as a improved first base program because that's where he typically had been playing, even though I would have preferred that it could have been a left field program. But at least there's some improvement there. Chase Dora proved his defense at pitcher. Andy Toribio, no improvement as an infielder there. Sergio Palomares, a little bit better on the base paths. Outstanding result from Amare Alcindor in his program to improve his defense at second base. He's still a prospect with some potential in our organization. Jonathan Scherer, outstanding, improving his defense. Uresti, unfortunately, no improvement in the outfield. Outstanding result from Jesus Saldana defensively as a pitcher. And then the final poor result, unfortunately, was the guy who just made the major league team for the first time. Poor result for Chuck Huntley, improving his defense, although it looks like no noticeable changes there. So he was looking more like himself after he didn't regress, but no improvements either. So certainly could have been worse because really only one significant impact from the three poor programs, and that was perhaps a few more leg injuries to our utility infielder, Steve Allison. So as I sometimes say, not optimal, but also likely not the end of the world. And as we get ready for the regular season to be getting underway, minor league system ranks 12th out of 30 systems. You can see we do at this point have 6 top 100 prospects, actually 6 top 80 prospects. The young IAFA pitcher Ernesto Comunez will likely be moving him up to Class A ball when we go through our minor league system between now and the next episode and kind of clean up our minor league teams and handle a bunch of promotions. Luis Godina, infielder, also likely headed to single A ball. Mike Blumenshine, who we picked in the first round a year ago, still recovering from that shoulder inflammation that limited to just 3 games when he joined us out of Brown. He is a guy that we hope could be in the mix for a rotation spot in the not-too-distant future. Bit of a bummer that his first professional season was largely wasted. David Palomares, who was our IAFA focus signing of the recently completed period, hopefully can follow in the footsteps in the coming years of some of those other IAFA players that we talked about earlier in the episode. Jesus Saldana, listed as the number 70 prospect in baseball. We talked about him already. We have signed him before this season to a 10-year, $70 million contract, despite the fact that he's never pitched in the major leagues. Hoping to get the most out of him. And then Darnell Selvey, who was our first-round pick in 2035, had some success in the development lab and the longer programs this offseason, and he will likely be beginning the year in A-ball at the age of 20. And with that, we are going to call it an episode. We will take a look at the waiver wire. We'll get our lineup straightened out. We'll get all of our minor league system straightened out offline between now and the next episode. And next time around, play ball on the opening 2037 season. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.